I want to welcome all committee members, citizens, fellow city staff. My name is Matt Amundsen. I'm the Director of Public Lands, Recreation, and Forestry for the City of Middleton. We realize that not all of you may be as engrossed in the city's flood recovery, and I want to take a quick opportunity to summarize what's happened since August of 2018 and where we're at today. So, summary of work completed. There was the initial storm cleanup. After we kind of regrouped from that, one of the first things that happened is the Water Resources Commission hired Cardno to do an assessment of the flood damage in the creek corridor and develop a 5-year plan for for stream bank stabilization. At around the same time, we were engaged with the Friends of Pheasant branch on a number of topics, and Dr. Jeff Sledge, a professor at UW, approached us about having a UW Master's student project focused on the creek corridor, and the class was titled Reimagining the Unimaginable. Mark Wagner, who's the assistant director for our department, and I both assisted with that process with the UW class, and really this master plan that we're going to discuss tonight kind of really built off of both the initial Cardno report and the UW student project. During 2019, the city contracted with EOR Mars, which is a consultant firm that did a floodplain modeling study, that the large maps that show a lot of blue and orange. The blue was the the blue shows the 100-year floodplain, the orange shows the 500-year floodplain. Late January, that plan was presented to the Water Resources Commission, I believe has been to some other committees as well. And then there's been a number of construction repair projects that are either underway or have completed. And a lot of those were highlighted. These are excerpts from this year's 2019 annual report that the city did. On the left shows the repair work that was done adjacent to Park Street, where there was a significant erosion. On the right shows behind the police department, the Donna Drive detention pond and the repair work that occurred there. Baskerville Harbor, off of Lake Mendota, there was some damage to pilings along the harbor, and those were repaired in late 2019. And the previously mentioned floodplain study. And then in the park system, there's been a number of repair projects and some temporary repair work. The Stricker Park tennis courts have been reconstructed. The bridges throughout the creek corridor were temporarily restored using a lot of gravel, is the best way to sum it up. The city also contracted with Ayers & Associates to redesign the Market Street and Airport Road underpasses, as well as the entrance to Woodside Heights Park that were all three heavily damaged in the flood, and that project is underway. Both of the underpasses have been reconstructed, and the work at Woodside Heights will start this spring. And then there's discussion below about the joint funded between the city and Friends of Pheasant branch, the master plan report for the creek corridor that'll be discussed here shortly. Future plan projects, as the flood study was completed, there's a number of projects that Water Resources is taking a look at. I know some RFPs have went out this week that Gary Huth from our engineering department has been working on. And those are going to focus on potential upstream stormwater capacity enhancements and looking at Esser Pond, the South Pond, South Fork, Confluence Pond. There's also plans or efforts underway at Graber and Tiedemann Pond. And these are projects that could be funded through a Prospective Economic Development Administration grant, or there are other projects that could be funded with that funding source as well. The city's been informed that we would likely be a recipient if we meet the criteria, which it appears that we have the ability to do. A little bit about FEMA. I know this is really hard to see, and this is thanks to Bill Burns from our finance department, who put this together and has really kept city staff on track of where we stand with FEMA and navigating that process. That's not been very easy, but I think the highlight here is if you look, and I know this is really tiny, way down on the far right-hand column, there's a number that's just over $7 million of damages that have been reported to FEMA, and the money to date that we've received from FEMA for those damages is $451,324. And again, how FEMA works is you have to complete the work, submit a whole lot of paperwork and data and validation to get that funding back, and then even that takes a significant amount of time once that documentation process has been completed. With that, it's my privilege tonight to introduce Aaron Stieber with Cardno. They were the lead consultant team on the restoration plan that he's going to discuss in great length. Also with Aaron, and I'll let him introduce his team, is Linda Fink with KL Engineering and Jens Jensen with Jensen Ecology. So, Aaron.
Thanks, Matt. So, see a lot of familiar faces out there. I know many of you. For those of you who don't know me, I work with Cardno. I've been with Cardno for about 12 years, focusing primarily on stream restoration all over the country. I've been working with the state of Middleton for about 11 years now in Pheasant Branch. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to go through the first part of our plan. Then Linda will take part, and then Jens will take part. So I'll let them introduce themselves when they come up. But I just kind of want to take a step back and say there's a lot that goes on when you think about the overall flood mitigation of the Pheasant Branch corridor. And this plan is specifically focused just on the area between the Confluence Pond to Century Ave. So with that, I just kind of want to start as an overall scale is we know that the Pheasant Branch watershed has lost a lot of the wetlands over the years and is urbanizing. And you can see that some work from the USGS shows that flows of Pheasant Branch over time have been increasing as well. Like I said, I've been working in Pheasant Branch for over 10 years now, and it's a pretty unique system where it has a base flow of about 5 to 10 cubic feet per second. So that's about how much water is usually in the creek flowing through the corridor. And as you can see, over the last 30, 40 years, there's been some really large floods in Pheasant Branch, some 900, 1,000 cubic feet per second, or 100 times what's normally in the creek. And then, the whole reason why we put this plan together in the first place is in August we had 11 to 15 inches of rainfall in 12 to 24 hours. So just a massive amount of rain. And, as a freak thing, it was a bullseye almost. The largest rainfall was centered directly or nearly directly right over the Pheasant Branch watershed. So a majority of that water had to come through Pheasant Branch after it hit. And in turn, the flood peak for that flood was over 4,000 CFS, or 400 times the amount of water that goes through normally. That resulting flood, as we all know, had a ton of damage, including a lot of stream bank erosion, which you can see. Another thing that caused a lot of damage was a lot of the trees that were uprooted, collapsed into the stream, and then got piled up into log jams and caused channelization around where the log jams were. Also, the trails within this project area corridor were also severely impacted. As you can see, kind of some chunks of what's left of the porous asphalt trail in some areas. Like Matt discussed, we've already repaired the Donna Drive pond, but that also let loose during this flood and deposited a lot of sand down into the creek corridor as well. And then there was also substantial damage to the bridges within the corridor. You can see kind of on the bottom here a piece of one of the bridges that floated downstream. And actually in the foreground of this picture, there is actually a bridge underneath all that debris, but the debris had just piled up and got caught in behind it. So knowing this, we were hired by the city to do a master plan for this project area. So one of the things that I find so great about Middleton, I mean, seeing all of you here and having worked in the corridor, is that there's a lot of public interest in the Pheasant Branch corridor. I spend just as much time working when I'm down in the Creek corridor working with contractors, talking to interested residents on what we're doing, why we're doing it, how is it going to affect different things, as I spend talking with the contractors that I'm actually working with. So people are very inquisitive, and I think that's a really good thing. For this process, we had public outreach in the form of 2 public input meetings that took place in June and September at the Cromery Middle School, where we discussed a lot of different options and different things we were thinking about. And it was really great. I mean, some of the information that came out of those meetings were things that I would have never even imagined were important to people. So I think it really helped us come up with better ideas for this plan. For any of you that did attend those meetings, thank you. And also, the city put out 2 public surveys. And those surveys had a variety of questions about the corridor, what people think about the corridor. And again, information that we gleaned from those surveys was very beneficial and really helped us as we went through putting this plan together. So this is just a quick summary of on the left shows all the different areas that were represented in the public surveys, online surveys that were taken, and then on the right is just kind of a heat map. So you can see that, as expected, a majority of the input on those surveys did come from around the Middleton area and around the corridor area. But also, I think this kind of shows a nice representation of people from outside Middleton also really identify with the corridor and took the time to answer questions about Pheasant Branch as well. And some of the things that came out, I think, that were pretty interesting is over 70% of people that answered the first online survey said that they visit the corridor at least weekly or greater. So that was a huge number of people that really do use this corridor frequently. And I think, having input from them was really beneficial, because these are the people that are using this corridor, on at least a weekly or daily basis. Another thing that kind of came out in general was that the corridor is used for exercise and nature. So bird watching and keeping it natural was a common theme for a lot of the response that we got from the public. And then just what people really wanted to see us focus on as we went through restoring this area was the stream itself, or the creek, and the trails. So a lot of what you see within this master plan focuses on those 2 aspects of this area. So in general, the corridor is valued by the community and has various users that want to see it kept as natural as possible. And it came up in a lot of the comments was to use this flood damage and flood event as an opportunity to not only replace what was lost, but to see how we can make it better, so that it can be a better, more beneficial place for all the users in the future. So as Matt mentioned, one of the things that we did following the flood was to go and do a flood damage assessment. So myself and a team went down through the corridor and analyzed all the stream banks to identify which stream banks had high potential for future erosion or were highly eroded. And we did that all the way from the confluence pond all the way down through north of Century Avenue, as well as the North Fork and South Fork. So we have that data in our plan for this project area from the confluence pond to Century. And as you can see, there was thousands of feet of stream bank that were either extremely, very, or highly eroded as a result of flooding and as a result of some of the collapsing banks and water that got piled up behind bridges and things like that. So there's a lot of damage to the stream banks, and there's also a lot of trees that didn't collapse completely and are still out there, but are basically not going to make it very long. So most of the soil and dirt has eroded around their roots. A lot of them are leaning and are about to fall over. But those trees can be used as a resource to be included into the stream bank restoration to stabilize eroding stream banks, but also to create habitat, underbank habitat for fish and amphibians, different things like that. They can be orientated in ways through the use of different kind of structures. Toewood is a big one that we at Cardinal like to use, but it creates underbank habitat where amphibians, fish, different things like that can hide underneath the bank and are protected from predators, and orientated in a way into flow to create helical flow and create scour to help create deep pool habitat within Pheasant Branch that is currently lacking in the system because of all the material that was deposited during the floods. So yes, there will have to be more trees removed that are pretty much dead man walking anyway. But I think reusing those trees in a manner that will create benefits to the stream corridor is an important part that we tried to really focus on in this plan. Another thing that having this wood in the stream banks does is provides a food source for aquatic insects, and those aquatic insects then start basically little micro food chains where different things feed off of those insects and different things feed off of them. So they can be a really great resource instead of just pulling everything out and chipping it. Another way to address some of these eroded banks is putting in stream structure configurations that can actually redirect flow away from the bank. So using stone, boulders, wood, different things, you can orient those into flow so that they actually will force flows back towards the center of the channel and create near bank actually deposition. So you could take an eroded area and use these structures to create actually go from an area of active erosion to induce actual deposition on that same stream bank, depending on how you engineer the structures. And then you can get creative with the wood and the rock. And like this is a picture of a Roolwad log vane J-hook combo. And basically, what it is using a combination of stone and wood to, again, force flows back towards the center of the channel, create deep pool habitat, and create underbank habitat. This is a photo that's actually one that I designed and we installed up in the Knife River on the north shore of Lake Superior. And the other thing that we could do to address those stream banks is actually relocating the channel away from some of these steep eroded banks. This is a photo of a job we just completed in the Blackhoof River up on the north shore of Minnesota. And you can see there's 40-foot high collapsing cliffs in the background. By pulling the stream away from those collapsing banks and creating some floodplain access, we stop that active erosion from entering the stream and also increase the flood flow capacity at this site. The good thing is we actually have a case study in our project area where we did this near the Cromery Middle School. So a couple years ago, before we built, or right after they built the addition to the Cromery Middle School, Pheasant Branch was, the creek channel was going right along a steep eroded bank above which the new addition to the middle school was built. So we worked with the DNR, the Corps of Engineers, to actually move that channel away from the eroding high cliff, and then also create some floodplain access that's currently lacking in the corridor. And after the August 2018 flood, we saw that this was one of the areas that actually sustained some of the least amount of damage throughout this whole project area. So you can see a picture on the left is after construction, and a picture on the right is 2 days after the flood event, as soon as the water is receded. Well, probably 2 weeks after the flood event, after the water is receded. And this is just a photo of that same area here last August. So you can see that the banks are still in good condition and have good vegetation on them. So there is some opportunity to do more of this based on how that area made it through the 2018 floods. This is just a figure out of the floodplain study that EOR did. And a couple of things about this figure, if you can see, so areas like this where you have a lot of area to work with between the valley walls could be potentially good areas to look at and identify areas where we may be able to relocate that channel away from steep eroding banks. Another thing is areas like this area here show that the 100-year flow is really pinched through this section, and there may be some opportunity to do some grading here to allow that 100-year flow a little bit more access to help move those flood flows through so they don't narrow down and cause as much damage. Now, there are places like right here where you just don't have any room to work with. The valley walls are so tight, we're kind of stuck with what we got in this area. So there may be some things within the channel that we can do to help dissipate stream energy. But I think the overall arching theme that should be taken into account when we look at restoring the creek corridor is to dissipate stream energy wherever possible and try to increase that flood flow capacity through the corridor so that you don't have sustain as much damage during the next flood event. Another thing that is kind of really shows up on this map is that the whole, basically pretty much the entire valley from wall to wall is inundated with water during a 100-year flood. So trying to design a bridge that can pass a 100-year flood in this area isn't going to work unless we start from the top of the valley to the top of the valley, which isn't very realistic for this area, but just something that I wanted to point out. And then I will now pass it over to Linda to talk more about the bridges.
All right. Hello, my name is Linda. I'm with KL Engineering. I'm a landscape architect. I've been doing trail design and construction for about 21 years, give or take. So I'm just going to go over the bridge and trail portion, give you guys a summary of what we all found. So your existing conditions, what's out there kind of looks like this. 5 mainline bridges with bike and pedestrian use. You have 12,000 pound vehicle design load with 12-foot clear width. Railing height, 54 inches. Kind of hard to see, but galvanized sill pans substructure. What I mean by that is you have the bridge itself and they're sitting on pans that are like this big. And that's how they're anchored. Wooden deck and railing. There is one side path bridge, which is the top picture that you guys see. Pedestrian use only, 30,000 pounds per square foot. That's your pedestrian loading, 10,000 vehicle design load. Do you guys have a 10,000 vehicle that's only 5 foot wide? 6 foot clear width. Railing height is 42 inches. Same thing with sill pans and wooden deck and railing. So when we were doing this exercise, we looked through all these different elements, the bridge type, the railing, the width, the loading, the decking, and substructure, taking into account public opinion and then engineering designs. The bridge type that the public liked the best, most cost-effective, liked the look, nature, prefabricated weathered steel Pratt truss style, which is the picture you guys see at the top. The railing, if you look at the cartoony picture on the bottom, was 48 inches. For everyone's reference, 42 inches is your minimum that you want to go with bike ped. 54 inches is your maximum. The 48 inch, if you think about it as you guys are walking along the trails, if you go with the tall one, it's tough for little kids to see past. And even as an adult, you're kind of doing this if you just want to look. So the 48 inch is good from the standpoint it still gives the bicyclist a good feeling of security, but then allows for a little bit more view sheds, I guess, for the pedestrians. The loading, 90 pounds per square foot and 20,000 pound vehicle. This then is 14-foot wide clear. One of the comments in this design was that there was at times conflicts between bicyclists and pedestrians. So going with that 14-foot wide clear helps to on your bridges. Ipe wood decking or asphalt, depending on maintenance needs. And then substructure. If you look at the picture on the bottom, pile bent piers with a concrete cap or pile supported abutments. What that means is we'll actually be showing it in the bank, but those go down deeper. It's a deep foundation and it's not gonna move. If you guys recall being on the corridor, how many of the bridges moved? Every single one moved, just kept on going down. We don't want that to happen. So in our proposal, or in the master plan, we propose that we're increasing the length of the bridge. Almost all the bridges are 60 foot long, and you ask why. They look fine, right? Okay, so the top picture shows the original. So these pictures are actually based on, I think, bridge number 2. Originally, you had 35 foot was your stream bank, right? So a 60 foot wide bridge, great, works no problem, right? Then you had the flood, picture on the bottom. Now the bridges, as Matt had referenced, how'd you guys make it that it kind of works? There's a lot of stone there. If you guys go on the corridor right now, you'll see it. The pans, which are those little gray things right there, are sitting basically right there. It's not sustainable. So, why we talked about the flood damage. So now if you look at these two pictures, because the flood damage reconfigured the stream, we have the wider opening. What we want to do, so where it's at right now, you have 6 foot at bridge number 2, 6 foot 4 inches clear from your ordinary high water to your bottom of your headers. What that means is when we had the flood event or when we have any sort of higher water, what we want to get is as much clear, not as much, because as Aaron referenced, we can't get the 100 year. There's no way. We'd have to be 50 feet, right? But we just want to have more than we currently do. So what we went through and we said, okay, looking at this, let's go for at least 8 foot. So we did. So that 8 foot clear, if you look at the bottom, so this is what we're proposing then, gives us, so if we have a flood event, we're aiming for, let's say 50 year if we can. At least we have more. So that can keep on rising and we still have that clear, so it's not hitting anything. Now another question that can come up is, okay, well, we have those bridges right there. Why don't we just shove some piles in the middle, right? And make it that you can extend. Okay, good question. The negative of that is you want to keep it clear. Anytime you put more stuff in the middle, you're making it that you're going to raise the flood elevation back, and you're just making one more thing that a tree or anything else can hit and create that log jam, as Aaron showed. So, clear span with the new substructures. What you see in the bottom picture is the piles that I had kind of shown, and see how there's actually some wiggle room between the edge and that. What that allows for is then if you do have a catastrophic event, you have some scour, you still have that protection. So it's actually double protection. We minimize the backwater increase, and then we're getting the protection of the substructure with the setback. So this is kind of what I was talking about before. With what Aaron had noted was bridge number 1 right now, the 50-year flood hits the low chord. Once you hit the low chord, that's going to be an issue, right? Look at bridge number 2. With a 10-year flood event it hits, we want to get it above 10-year. So these then are our concepts, estimated cost, and proposed spans. Now, one thing I want to say is based on the notes. The links that were planned were conservative based on a plan set down from existing channel. We'd rather be conservative than liberal and then have, you always want to get less than what you're expecting. Geotechnical investigations will confirm substructure type, which may decrease bridge length, and final stream alignments will determine placement of bridges, which may decrease bridge length. It is always the potential, we always want to have the shortest stream crossing possible. So if we're realigning the stream in areas, we're going to look to see where that can be. Then the trail itself. So the existing conditions, 10-foot wide porous pavement, 2 to 3 foot stone shoulders. Stone shoulders are largely vegetated at this point. Post-flood, they were repaired as possible, but you guys saw the pictures, you've been out there too, as far as what all happened. However, pathway conditions did deteriorate due to the heavy machinery cleanup, washouts, undercutting, heaving. So at this point, the trail has some porous asphalt still out there, a lot of stone. There is some areas that have inconsistent trail widths from the undercutting. You can see on that top picture kind of how it did that. And tripping hazards, overgrown stone shoulders. Okay, so during the planning process, we went through a number of options as far as what we wanted to do. And I have a quick summary on each of these. But option A was no change. Keep it as it is, just pave it, be good. Ironically, that's the most expensive out of all the options and didn't meet the criteria that everyone wanted to see. Trail cross-section, 10-foot wide asphalt trail, 2-foot stone shoulder. Trail length, 5,620 linear feet, 2.023 million. Option B was we realign it, but we're able to realign it to reduce the number of bridges down to 4. 12-foot wide asphalt trail, the intent on that being that we were allowing for a wider trail so we wouldn't have as many bike ped conflicts. Turf shoulder, length slightly longer. Option C, realigned as well, but with this one, we went for some split use paths. I'll get into this in more detail in the slides. And that is the preferred option. Final trail alignment, one thing, this is a major element to reiterate, final trail alignment and bridge placement will be dependent on where the stream ultimately gets realigned, additional natural stormwater facilities. What I mean by that is if in the design we're looking at areas that let's bring it down and topography-wise, okay, that's obviously going to play into that. And detailed design investigations such as geotech, natural resource inventory, et cetera. Right now we have these plans, but with the detailed investigation, we may have to scooch it, so to speak. So this is a map that showed the no change option. You can see the red is the bridges, so path as it is. And this is what basically it looks like. Simplest redesign, that's a positive. And you have the soft running surface for the runners. Cons is most expensive, and it doesn't address any of the issues with floodplain, stormwater, bike ped conflicts. Option B, realigned. So what you can see here is that we take out some of the bridges. Spectacular. This is what that then looks like. So now we have the widened 12-foot path, so it allows for a little bit more flexibility with both users. Cons is the stream realignment. The preferred option is realigned with the split-use trail. If you look at the mapping, the split-use trail is the potential side paths, which are on the screen, the light purple. And this is what that then looks like. Now, the potential side paths are not all over the place. The intent of that is to use those where we have the tougher, like blind corners, so to speak, if we have tight areas like that. We focus them on areas that we've already realigned the trail, so there's already, let's say, the residual of an asphalt pathway there, or areas that have been vegetation removal or anything like that. My point being that the side paths are not going to be additional, we're not going to be tearing up more stuff. It would be at areas that we've already disturbed. But the positive being that it's allowing for people to rest and observe and then or take off the trail so you don't have the conflicts. This then reduces the 2 bridges and improves floodplain stormwater bike ped conflicts. That is our preferred option. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jens.
Hi, Jensen Ecology, part of the team with Aaron. I have worked with Middleton over the years on some potential projects down in this corridor, so this area was not unfamiliar to me. So what we did as part of this plan was just kind of do a very brief inventory of what we found down there as existing conditions and then opportunities to restore along with the stream realignment, well, whatever stream realignment happens and trail realignment. And so a lot of the details obviously will be worked out, but what we did, and as you can see with all these, this multicolored map, which is also up there and on the screens, is kind of the rough boundaries of the kind of habitat types that either exist or exist in kind of a degraded fashion or could exist with some effort on our part to to restore them. So these would be either restored ecosystems or potentially created areas. And we'll kind of go through each one of them. And again, these boundaries are rough. They would be ground truths, when the project actually happened, but this is kind of what we found out there. So the first one, what we're calling kind of herbaceous floodplain restoration. Again, we just kind of came up with some of these names are a little, interchangeable in some areas. So this would be the area from Deming to Parmenter mostly. So it'd be way upstream, and this was kind of the channelized section of the stream that doesn't really have many trees. I mean, it's got some remnant oaks here and there, and then some lower quality trees such as box elder and cottonwood. So what this would kind of consist of is removing the invasive plants, regrading of the slopes to a plantable gradient, and to kind of create floodplain benches and drier species as we move upslope. It would get dry quite a bit. But again, those floodplain benches or regrading would be in conjunction with whatever Aaron kind of is deciding the grading to be. But there would be some opportunities in this area to do something of the sort. Maybe add a little potential little sinuosity to the stream for habitat as well, and floodplain access. The sand prairie restoration. This we kind of there's obviously a ton of sand that was deposited in a lot of areas, and one in particular below Cromery, the picture on top. The picture below is actually not the corridor. That's a sand prairie I've been working on for several years up in Adams County. So some of the species, just to give you a flavor of some of the opportunities. But with all this deposition, to remove that sand would obviously be a huge cost and an unnecessary one, in my opinion. So to kind of work with the sand that's there and do kind of an interesting sand prairie restoration, think about like some of the terraces along the Wisconsin River, for instance, where you have different kind of sand-dependent species, gives you a lot of opportunities to do some interesting things. There's several feet of sand in some of these areas, and I think it's kind of an opportunity to do something interesting. The emergent wetland, these two photos also are not from the corridor, but some examples of some kind of emergent vegetation from some other projects. But there is one kind of emergent wetland in Frog Pond that we could work with and restore with taking some of the trees out. We get more sunlight to the ground, trees that would need to come down for the flooding reasons, but also invasive trees, et cetera. And then another interesting thing is if Aaron does move the stream and abandon it, we can leave those old oxbows potentially to give us an opportunity to do some wetland habitat on site, and then potential storage, stormwater storage as well. The Mesic woodland restoration, kind of the more north-facing slopes in the corridor. We some remnant species we find like maidenhair fern and alternate leaf dogwood, kind of more Mesic type species. So those were kind of indicators for us when we saw them. And so again, the boundaries of these, but these would kind of be more like passively restored, with mostly clearing of kind of the invasive trees and shrubs, and then managing invasives going forward. The oak savanna restoration, that's probably the largest area throughout the corridor. A lot of these upland areas, the photo on the bottom is actually from the corridor. It's a little hard to see at the scale, but it's this really interesting knoll that is currently super overgrown. But if you actually climb up there, you can find a lot of sedges and other things, and growing kind of give you an idea of, getting sunlight to the ground would get oaks to regenerate and get the other herbs going and things like that. So and that's just one example. There's a lot of examples throughout the corridor. So getting the sunlight back to the ground. And again, this is also an erosion problem, because underneath a lot of these invasive shrubs, it's just bare soil. So because they've been starved of sunlight, and then managing with prescribed fire where you can in certain areas down the road could be something to consider. The floodplain restoration. This is kind of, I guess, what we're calling sort of wooded floodplain. These two photos are from the corridor. The one on top is an area that has been restored, and it does have some interesting forbs in it, and some native shrubs and things like that. So kind of an example of some things that have been working down there. And the photo on the bottom again is one of those trees that Aaron was talking about that is definitely compromised, that is going to fall over in there, and there's a lot of those. There's some existing large canopy trees, and there's a lot of walnut down there. Some nice specimen cottonwood, but some of those would probably be cleared, and then silver maples, and then there's definitely stands of black locust that would need to be removed, and then a lot of our invasive ground cover like Dame's rocket, garlic mustard, to name a few. And so that was very brief, but questions time. The entire construction?
Yeah.
With the stream? I don't know, Aaron, can you? I mean, on the actual, Aaron would be better. to
So,
answer
yeah,
construction
I
questions.
think just to take a step back, you know, I think some of the things that Jen's outlined was to try to create a diversity of habitats within this corridor. There's real opportunity to do that, so I think that's one of the things that we're looking at doing in this master plan. Another thing is that right now I've identified looking at having all the construction completed by 2022, I think. And some of the vegetation that stuff that Jens was talking about is going to take a little bit longer, again, depending on what the final stream designs are, trail placements, and then establishment and ongoing maintenance is going to be key too. So I know in a lot of other places that I work in the communities will spend so much money coming in and restoring damage after a large flood event like this, put a ton of money into restoring the stream banks, restoring trails, but then not set aside any money for maintenance. And what happens in 5 or 6 years is that a lot of that work that was performed starts to get overrun with invasive species and different things like that. So the idea is, especially in the beginning, really working on getting these plant species established so that they can kind of outcompete a lot of the invasive species would be key.
You mentioned something about the 100-year flood, and then the bridges were 50 years or something. I'm curious, what of the flood statistics for 100 years, are we using past ones or current ones, or are we projecting for the future? And I guess the question is, what produces, how much rain produces a 100-year flood based on your modeling? Are we talking a 4-inch rain, a 6-inch rain? Because we know the climate projections are going to be increasing frequency of really extreme events. So I guess I'm wondering, are we really designing this for the future, or trying to create something that was for the past?
Yeah, it's a really good question. As far as the 100-year flood elevations that we were showing was based on the EOR study. So I didn't complete that study. I don't have the exact rainfall numbers off the top of my head. But
I mean, a lot of the statistics on 100-year floods are based on.
But to get at your larger question, you know, I think that's why we're trying to get as much increase as possible, because I think you're correct that we may be entering into a climate where these low frequency, high intensity rainstorms are becoming more common. And so I know when they did this flood study, they did try to update old numbers that they had from for 100-year floods based on new information and taking into account the flood of 2018. So, but basically within the corridor, you know, we just try to do the best we can, and because you're never going to be able to design something that's going to pass all the floods, but we can do a better job than what was there before. Yep.
Now that they call it the ditch that runs from Pleasant View, where they want to do those apartments.
Mm-hmm.
They call it the ditch. Is that going to be revitalized? Are we doing anything with that?
Not as part of this project, but I'm not sure. I would imagine at some point. Jim, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay, you good?
I did have a question.
Oh yeah.
I didn't see it. Do you have any recommendations or any considerations of some of the garbage filled spots that we found during the from scour? Should I say it again? Did you hear me?
So
I think you heard.
that's another thing that is definitely going to need to be looked at. So There is an old landfill that the stream had moved into and eroded through, which for anyone that was down there at the flood, there was tons of old glass and things like that. And future design considerations for this area are going to need to take that into effect, whether that is capping, removal of some of that material, or trying again to maybe push the two out and provide some protection so that the stream can't cut back into that landfill. But it's definitely going to need to be a design consideration for whoever does a stream design within this corridor.
There's no cost assigned to that kind of effort, I take it?
Not within this master plan, just because the costs right now are unknown depending on what we find in there. Did you want to add to that?
To further clarify, the DNR will require us to put a project, I forget the exact name, but it's a project management plan or a plan of how we remediate that will have to be submitted and approved by the DNR as we move forward.
Gary?
If anyone cares about the numbers, the NOAA 14 Atlas was using 6.66 inches for the NOAA 14 Atlas. I'm going to start singing. The NOAA 14 Atlas was using 6.66 inches in this area of the state for its 100-year assumed rainfall. The new study, based on numbers from UW, are using something close to 7.3, and that's what those maps are based on
So they've been adjusted.
for the 100-year. I don't know what they used for the 500 offhand.
Is that going to help answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, well, I guess the issue on the bridges, I mean, you were talking about trying to get them up to 50-year capacity. I mean, if you have a 50-year flood, which is much less rainfall, and I'm questioning whether even that's every 50 years, it's going to be a frequency more frequent than that. Is that enough? I mean, if a 50-year, 5-inch rainfall, which is maybe 50 years, comes down, are we going to wash out a bridge again? You know, so in the one that was, I think, even a 10-year, you were talking about trying to do something to raise it. But are we really building for the future? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Right. And I think if we want to continue to have bridge access in this corridor, then that's something that is going to have to be a risk worth assuming, because the entire corridor is underwater during the extremely large events like the 100-year flow. So we can't build a bridge that will pass that because it's water from side to side. But what we can do is make some of those larger flood events that right now aren't passing through the bridges now then pass through. And so we are then taking into account that there's going to be more larger floods coming and doing our best to design for that and to increase the space under the bridge so that they don't act as such debris dams for the more common rainfall events that occur.
I think the other consideration there or thing to think about is the previous bridges were basically sitting on a metal runner sled, if you will. And when the ground washed away, it was very easy for those to go with the water. And the new design shows a pile that's driven, several piles driven into the ground with a concrete abutment poured over those piles, and then the bridge is fastened to that concrete abutment that's secured, 20, 30, 40 feet into the ground by those piles, whatever the geotechnical report would say. We just finished a boardwalk installation where we did, for the first time ever, piles at Middleton Hills. And it was a really neat experience to see how that process worked, and knowing that that is going to be much more suitable for the conditions and long-term benefit to that boardwalk system.
Does your plan make any recommendations with regard to the culverts under Park Street and whether we'd be better off to bridge Park Street?
It does mention it as not something that to be, it mentioned it as something to look at in the future. So not part of the major restoration that is lined out for the corridor right now. But in the future, you know, the city has done work there to hopefully eliminate a lot of the problems that were caused during this last flood event. But personally, you know, I think in the long run, a bridge is always better. There are some tricky points to that area because what's also there is acting as grade control, and there's a pretty significant drop in between the two. But there's also things that you can do to mitigate that drop. And you know, my vision of having worked in this corridor for so long is eventually I would like to see from Lake Mendota all the way up to Park Street or past Park Street to all be fish passable. Because I've talked to people from the Yahar Fishing Club and different things like that you know, said a long time ago, pike from Lake Mendota used to come up into Pheasant Branch and spawn. And, you know, if at some point in time we could ever get back to that point, I think that would be a really amazing transformation for the city.
Just a comment. It sounds like a really, really good plan, and I'm really grateful that you're thinking about the animals and also the insects, which we're losing at such a rapid rate. And that's about all I had. It wasn't really a question.
We're kind of my back to you. You guys have any questions?
Yeah, I do. So let's start with the number one. Good job. Looks really, you know, you worked hard and looks good. So now, since we have a EOR study, so did you actually have the cross section of the water at 5, 10, 50, 100-year level, where you can actually see that where water would be? And since we have that model, we should be able to do that. So Linda or you, or did you actually have the cross section so that we could actually see, and then you can actually configure the bridges where and how do you want to put it?
So what we did was we used that model
Mhm.
to show where they currently, the low chord or the bottom of the bridge, what year flood event currently is impacted by that flood. But that model will come in handy then to then use those elevations to design bridges in the future. But I think it would be premature to design a one bridge size fits all without first knowing, having all the design characteristics in for the stream restoration, where the channel will ultimately be located, and things like that.
Well, how?
It's,
If I was looking at, I would look at the cross-section first. And I think since we have that model, we paid a lot of money, I like to look at it. Number two, if you look at page 36, so you have this, I don't know what the difference is, floodplain activated, water to flow. So bridge number 1 and bridge number 3 and 4 and 6, that's 100-year flood. They're just fine. And then you look at the water to low chord and your bridge number again 1 and 4. So I don't know what this data really means. It doesn't really. So that's why if you have a
this
cross.
data came out of the flood study. So
Okay.
This was done by EOR for the purposes of this plan. They looked at the bridges.
So do you have any plan to have cross sections where the bridges would be? Cross section of the flood water.
Yeah, so now we'll talk to this a little bit. I'm gonna face you. and
Yeah,
talking
either way,
here
so yeah.
At the same time, this is weird. Yeah, yes, I guess. Oh, hey, okay. So in detailed design, what we would be doing, number one, we'd first figure out the stream realignment, right? So with that stream alignment, then we'd place where we realistically think the bridges should go. When we have that, then we go and get the geotech. So with our geotech, we determine what makes sense for where to place the bridge to. If the geotech shows, hey, we want to do it here, and it's ridiculous, we're going to move the bridge. At that point, then we look at the stream studies, see where our flood elevations are, and then come back and say, okay, what are we comfortable with? So what we did for the purpose of this study was say we want to have 8 foot clear. Okay, that's what we said. Somebody asked here, can we get to the 100-year? No. Realistically, we can't for most of them. Otherwise, our bridges are going to be 20 feet tall and 500 feet long. So, as part of the detailed design, what that'll incorporate is looking at it from the standpoint, what is our risk tolerance? Thank you, whoever just said that. Risk tolerance. And to what Matt had said before, these bridges aren't going to be the bridges like they are now. With us having the pilings, those will go down, depending on the geotech, anywhere from 30 to 50 feet. We'd also have it from the standpoint of having that additional setback from the actual stream. Also know that with the improvements to the actual corridor, what we're looking at doing is trying to dissipate the water so it's not just all funneling right there and we get more overturning. So to answer your question, do we have the exact at this point? No, we don't, but we need more detailed design in order to do that.
So if you had that, you could actually reconfigure the channel where the bridges are, and then you could actually find out you actually need to replace those bridges, because you could possibly keep the bridges as they are, and you are saying that they will be more expensive.
I would say, okay, I would say no, probably, because I don't think that we want to make the stream itself narrower than it what currently is.
No,
And
I wouldn't narrow it.
Right. Well, right now, if you looked at that one graphic, the bridges right now are sitting on the edges of the streams. So it's not sustainable as it is. Can those bridges be used somewhere else? Potentially, yes. Yeah. But as they currently are, I would strongly recommend against it because it's not sustainable for another flood event. They will float again and they will get more damage.
Well, how about if you anchor them? I mean, you
So-
anchor them where they,
So, but then that goes into the same thing from the standpoint of what I had referenced where the question was, okay, if you just put some anchors right in the middle of the stream, now you're creating more obstructions again. So you're creating a dam.
anchor at the ends. I mean, just like some of the bridges are done in cross planes, and one of the bridges is done close to the Wood Creek condos. At least part of it is anchored by using.
So.
Anyway,
but-
maybe we need a different small group of people discussing this, because we are talking about spending $2 million on that, replacing these bridges and putting a trail, and actually walk that trail before I came here, all the way from end to end, back and forth, and I wanted to have a good feeling of it.
So I would
So-
say with the 2 million though, too, from that chart, if you recalled, if we go with our preferred option, which is option C, you take those
Two
6
bridges out,
bridges and take 2 bridges out.
and you're still about $1.9 million.
And recognize that's a conceptual cost that you need to have detailed design to be able to actually assign.
And when you look at the original cost of that trail, I don't, and that was the porous asphalt, that was, I don't exactly know, but anyway, these are the things which we need to
Yeah.
actually talk about, because I really have serious concerns about those estimates, so.
Okay?
And the other point which I want to make is that most people want to keep this as a nature conservancy. And putting the 12-foot wide path, 14-foot wide bridges, and having, so that you can have, I don't know, why would you want to have the trucks going over them? Because the trucks now, they go over there's a little path. So why do we need to have these bridges so strong that you can have
So one of the main concerns with this trail was that there was conflicts between the bicyclists and the pedestrians, and that people didn't feel that there was enough separation that way. When it comes to bridges, you want to have, so you have to, when you're talking about bicyclists, you have to have more from offset in order to make it so a bicyclist feels safe and such. That also being said,
Linda, can I jump in? I think the number one comment that I've heard
whether it's from the Friends of Pheasant branch or the public input that we've had during this process, is the number of conflicts on the trail between walkers, bikers, runners, bird watchers, that a lot of the people that are in a slower walk or are observing nature feel like they're being ran off the path by bicyclists. And I think that's one of the design considerations that this takes into effect. The other piece that kind of surprised both Mark and myself in the survey was the amount of people that felt strongly that the trail system should be cleared of snow in the winter. And that's really a trigger for the weight limitations on the bridge, because we clear snow with F-150 pickup trucks, and if we had to have specialized equipment that was smaller or a special weight to accommodate a reduced bridge, that's extra staff hours, and it's a drain on our staff resources that are pretty limited to make that clear of snow in the wintertime. The quickest, easiest, most convenient way for us to clear it of snow is with a pickup truck.
Those are excellent points, Matt, and the split trail is really a good idea, and I think, most people would agree there in certain places where you can have a split trail, but not everywhere. So there are probably 2-3 places, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that, so.
Thank you. Gurdeep, I appreciate the fact that you're concerned about what we're spending, and am always concerned about budget. I also, though, appreciate this master plan, because it seems like there's the possibility with the plan that particularly with the redesign of the bridges, the realignment of the stream, and the use of vegetation that actually makes sense in a floodplain, that we might not have to spend this money every few years, that we could do it right or close to right, and maybe have it last a while. The existing trail system definitely lasted a while, but it would have been obviously much different if anyone had really thought about the impact of climate change and and if we had known what was going to happen as quickly as it's happening.
And
my concern, Gurdeep, is actually about the culverts. And I am hoping the master plan is clearer on this, that if we choose not to put a bridge there, that is a cost that we're going to probably pay for long term. That I don't know where the assessment is, but I'm assuming that somewhere in this whole process there was an assessment that said a percentage of the damage to the creek quarter was caused by the backup in the culverts. And I don't know what percentage it was, but certainly the erosion on the other side of Park Street was pretty clear and frightening to most people. So I don't know. You said in passing that you think in the long run we need to do a bridge. How clearly is that stated in the master plan?
It's stated. It's stated as a future project consideration, and it's just there's so much work to be done right now. Just repairing the damage and repairing the trails, that we decided to focus on that portion first, yet still outline that as something, because that's going to be a whole nother debate, a lot more of an associated cost, but something that can be done down the road. So that's the way that we outlined it.
Are you able to say anything about the risk of not doing it sooner? We had a number of questions from people who said, we believe that we think that things are only going to get worse, that we're not going to have less rain or less frequent major incidents.
So as a stopgap, I mean, the city has done a slope repair project there and has put in some things directly downstream of those culverts to kind of help protect the toe of the slope. But I definitely think it's something that's worth future consideration.
And the removal of the trees, that particularly the ones that are dead or dying, could make a difference to build up, I guess, along the stream. Okay, thank you.
Now, if I could answer, and I agree with your comments, we want to do it right even if it costs more. But there are two parts of it. One is this only addresses the conveyance part of the water. And the other part is, which is actually more important, which is the mitigation of it. So that is working with Madison, working with Springfield, and working with Milton, it's doing some things ourselves, so that the water, we won't have the same level of flood water coming through it. So we are looking at both parts, but of course we have to do it, doesn't matter what it costs, well, within reason what it costs, but we have to do it right. But we also have to make sure and check what we are doing is right. So I agree with you, so.
Yep, there's a lot of things that outside of this project area too that, like Gurdeep was saying, that can have a beneficial effect on the amount of water that comes off during these large storm events.
And in the long run, that's actually a lot more important because, even if we have more rain, we should be able to detain it in various detention ponds, working with our partners, whether it's Springfield or working with Madison or some doing ourselves, so.
Yeah, I'm on the Sustainability Committee, and so we've been talking about ways to make this whole restoration sustainable, and that means a lot of retention and detention upstream. A couple of issues. I've been associated with the university for a long time, and I know the lakeshore path there were people that wanted to pave that to make it a quicker way for bikes to get through, and people were able to stop it because they wanted to be able to hear the bikes coming and keep it natural, have more infiltration. And I think of the cost of the roads that were put down and all ripped out. And so I'm just asking a rhetorical question. I bike there with my wife maybe 6-8 times a year, and I do it in a pace that I enjoy the nature of it. I'm not using it as a corridor to zip through the city. And so what I'm wondering with these really wide paths, and I'm assuming you've got some pavement on it that you're planned for the bikes, whether, and knowing that we might have a higher frequency of storms. I mean, risk, as climate change scientists think of it, is the frequency of something happening and the cost of that that event happening. So the risk of more big storms occurring and a 5-6 inch rainfall really is not that much anymore. I mean, we may not get it any particular year. So I'm wondering if we put all this money into these wide paths and other things, whether we can't keep the naturalness of it and the leisurely pace to go through it, and know that, well, if we do get a storm, okay, we're going to have some path erosion, but we're not taking out big chunks of pavement and stuff like that. And whether we wouldn't be better off doing that until we're assured that we have the retention infiltration capacity upstream, and that's not going to be easy to do. So I guess I'm raising the question about, I like the floodplain idea. I like the idea of rerouting the channel away from the toes of the bank to prevent that severe erosion there. I think this is really good stuff. And I like the way you've brought in the natural area and these log structures. I've been involved with DNR stream restorations and this kind of stuff. It all makes great sense. I'm just wondering about the path compatibility with the nature area and whether we couldn't reduce some of the costs to make it less risky for this stuff all being destroyed and having to replace it.
Okay, I'll talk to that. Thank you. Couple things in terms of some people want just stone paths and not asphalt. So one of the things is permeability. If your path is actually compacted how it should be per ADA, it's actually not getting a lot of water in. It is almost like concrete. So there's to speak to that. Another main option, talking to maintenance, long-term asphalt pathways are way better from a maintenance standpoint than stone pathways. Stone pathways, even when you have your small rain events, are going to have the rivulets and all of that. So crews then have to, on a regular basis, go in, bring in more, and compact some more. In addition to that, from an actual user standpoint, when you're talking about families and such, the asphalt makes it easier for those users. If you're going to say like you said, some people enjoy the fact that you have the stone and you can hear people from the back as well. We've talked through the planning process that part of this too, in terms of that conflict, is some more public outreach, some signage, and just getting more of the, hey, let's be good trail users standpoint. You know, the typical on your right, all that kind of stuff. Are there gonna be some people that don't follow that? Yeah, but the 10-foot wide pathway that we're suggesting isn't massive from a standpoint of a bi-directional to multi-use pathway. From a safety standpoint, that is what you want to have based on the usage that Middleton has. That's a highly used trail. If we go narrower than that, the conflicts that have already been identified as major concerns are just going to increase. Matt wants to say something.
It's a classic question. I think you could poll a room of 100 people and 50 would want asphalt and 50 would want stone. From the maintenance standpoint, I think everyone's aware the Conservancy, the north of Century, is all stone paths. And I would, without the flood event, I'd estimate we spend somewhere between $10,000 to $12,000 a year on stone being brought in to repair those paths. And there's an environmental impact of that, as well as that we're consistently washing gravel and stone into the watershed.
Just to touch on your comment about risk in doing things in the upper watershed areas, I don't think that some of the ideas laid out in this plan and doing things upstream have to be mutually exclusive. If what we're proposing is constructed, doing some of those things upstream will only benefit what's there on the ground. So I think, from a larger watershed scale, doing both is probably the best thing. But for this plan, we just had to focus on the project area from the detention pond to Century Avenue.
I want to follow up with that. I certainly get that, and I appreciate what you've done. I wasn't thinking I thought they were going to be wider than 10 feet. That doesn't strike me as much. I would just say that this thing should move forward, but with as equal emphasis on looking at upstream in the watershed ways of retaining and infiltrating the water. One innovative thing, I was talking to the city engineer at the stormwater, Greg Freeze, and he was saying when they did the Breeze Terrace Stadium, they put infiltration underneath the AstroTurf. And he mentioned that Rockford has a massive playing field down there with all that AstroTurf. He doesn't know if they have infiltration, but he says tournaments go there because they know they can play on it and it's not going to be mud. And so we have a playing field out on the west side of Airport Road there. That's a massive area that it's all compacted and has very little infiltration. So I think we should be looking aggressively, as I know the Water Resources Commission is, but I think we should be getting these things timed so that we don't build this without some other additional upstream infiltration.
It's a really good point to think about infiltration and not just detention. I think they both need to go hand in hand and use both as much as we can. There is a little bit more urgency just because the stream banks are so damaged here and they're continuing to erode, and that sediment is continuing to end up in Pheasant Branch Marsh and ultimately in Lake Medona. So holding off on everything in here just to do that.
I'm not questioning the delay of this. I'm just saying that we should be really pushing hard to be doing upstream stuff.
And they go hand in hand. I agree completely.
And Dick, I agree with you completely. That's actually just as important and even more important. So, and we are working on it, because, otherwise you have the same flood, we spend those $6 million or whatever, it's all washed out again. So I have a question for you.
If I could, Mayor, I just wanted to add to the point that today an RFP was sent out from our Public Works Department to look at better stormwater management solutions upstream of the creek corridor, specifically the Confluence Pond area, Esser Pond, the South Fork, South Pond area, to try and explore what opportunities exist in those areas.
And I looked at it, and that's good. Now I have a question for you, that, so you classified those areas into theories, severe, moderate, and anyway. So there are 5, 6 areas which are severely eroded. Are you going to somehow prioritize which one you go with first and the second, or you plan to just do the whole thing?
I think the 3 levels, the 3 highest levels that we outlined would all be done. And my preference and what I would recommend is to work from upstream to downstream. So that way, construction debris and things that happen while you're doing construction don't wash down and fill in pools or cover up things that you've already constructed downstream. So starting at the Confluence Pond and working your way downstream would be my recommendation for doing that.
So are you going to do it in stages? Just one area versus?
I mean, it's basically going to depend on how the city wants to issue the design RFP. But I think what we've laid out in this plan is that the whole thing could be done in 1 year.
Okay, thank you.
To clarify, the whole thing being the stream bank restoration,
stream bank
not, the intent per the plan is stream bank restoration happens first, and then following that, you do the trail and the bridges, because obviously you need to have the alignment and all that stuff done prior.
What is the time frame for the vegetation portion?
So that would be done kind of concurrently after stream restoration portion. And then again, after trail reconfiguration. Then with hopefully ongoing maintenance after that to make sure that you get good establishment.
I love Oak Savanna, and I think we need more Oak Savanna, but I actually am very concerned about the amount of space that is designated as Oak Savanna, for the simple reason that there's a lot of other trees there that will have to be removed, and that's simply a lot of carbon sequestration that's currently happening at a time that we need more carbon sequestration. And so I'm wondering, what do we do with the trees that are felled? Are they chipped? Are they rapidly put back into the environment? Are we using that wood? Are we going to make a bunch of benches
It
out
would
of it?
definitely be reused in habitat structures for the stream restoration.
Yeah, I understand that you were going to use some of it. I have a hard time imagining you would be able to use that much.
Oh, you could use a lot. As far as carbon sequestration, I mean, when you get dense, deep-rooted native grasses, it's pretty comparable to what a tree can sequester.
Potentially more, especially as trees age, they actually respire carbon. I mean, trees become very, not very productive in older age. So some trees, and getting sunlight to the ground, controlling erosion, and getting the perennial root mass on the ground is gonna store carbon long term. And then in terms of the timing, yes, some of the vegetative work could go on now, well away from the stream corridor, and just ongoing. And again, those boundaries are rough, and those could all change. But yeah, there are a lot of trees that really need to come out, because there are some areas in the corridor where you can see where sunlight is getting to the ground, around Cromrie, for instance, and you can kind of see what maybe it could look like throughout more of the corridor, and a more sustainable way to manage that entire landscape. So,
Especially shallow-rooted introductory tree species that really don't do a very good job of having deep, dense roots that hold stream bank materials in place. But what they do a good job of is shading out the stream bank so that nothing else can grow there to trap and hold the stream bank in place.
For instance.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, which?
Black locust.
Black locust, yeah, those need to go.
Black locust.
I think that a lot of people walk through this corridor and they see very, very large trees and they appreciate them tremendously, and they don't necessarily know what species they are, and they're probably predominantly the cottonwoods.
And there are some nice cottonwoods, like we're not, there's some nice, cool, big trees.
Yeah.
But
And so what I'm wondering is if there will be, is there going to be a certain class of which those maybe don't go, or areas where an oak's not going to grow there, simply because it's,
Yeah.
well, at least maybe
I mean,
not the
cottonwood's
bur
a native
oaks.
tree, and it's,
Sure.
it has habitat values, cavities, et cetera. So, I mean, we would be selective, we're not gonna, and it would be very specific in selecting, and how exactly we'd select that hasn't been determined, but
Yeah.
we would definitely not just do
And a lot of the tree removal would be focused in the near stream bank areas.
Okay.
Because another thing that does is eliminates that future risk of the trees eroding, falling into the stream bank during a flood and piling up on bridges or causing debris jams that the stream then works around and causes more erosion. So it's kind of,
The point of the comments are not necessarily to dissuade you from it. Again, Oak Savannah, it's what it should be predominantly, but I just don't want a lot of public outcry if what they're used to seeing is just dramatically, radically changed.
and
I think that
There's a
could.
dramatic, having cut a lot of trees and be involved with a lot of trees, in my career, I mean, there can be that shock at first, but I do think I don't know, in my opinion, in Middleton, I feel like people would mostly kind of understand, and you may signage and outreach, and just kind of tell people what's going on, and I think in the long term, but yeah, there is definitely.
and I think there also needs to be a focus on the upper slope areas and where the trail is, trying to keep that as a wooded corridor, because I know a lot of people really enjoy, having that wooded corridor feeling as they come through. And that's far enough away from the stream bank in a lot of areas where there wouldn't be that tree removal needed closer down to the stream bank.
I think, though, that we've got to recognize that we've already been given the damage. The stuff has been screwed up, and we can love to say, let's keep it, let's not do anything, but it's already been done.
Right.
And I think I appreciate in your plan that you're looking at doing it sensitively. There'll be a point in the middle where this thing will get shredded, but it's already shredded. We can't go back. And so let's make something new, and I think I appreciate your plan. I particularly like your plan with C in there, but I think that you're expressing a sensitivity to regrowing it, so that 10 years from now we can sit there and say, "Wow, isn't this a beautiful place?" I mean, yes, we suffered 5 years in the middle, but
And that's the plan for all of the restoration projects I look at or I work on, is that when you come back 5-10 years from now, you'd never know that somebody actually did a project there.
To make it.
And I think the good point is that you're removing these trees close to the stream so that in case there are floods again, it doesn't happen. So that's a good point. You're not removing them, just like close to Clark Community School where they just wiped out. So that's not happening, so.
Mike?
Just a really big picture thought that I think it's important for everybody to think about, because we're all concerned about the cost for all of this, as well as the timing of all of it as well. And that is that upstream projects are probably going to take quite some time to come to fruition, especially if we have to buy land. Buying land is not easy for public projects, and it's very expensive to pay the appraised value of private properties. However, if we can utilize lands that the city already owns and work within those lands to create more storage, more stormwater capacity, that will give us a big head start. We had the 3-pond study that was done on the north side of town in a rural area, and the farmers so far have not responded to any inquiries from our consultants about those. They're going to want market value. Everybody wants market value for private property. We have a lot of public land, though, in the corridor, and if we can utilize the RFP results that come back and find areas within public lands, that will save us a lot of time and money in the long run. Another thought, Gary Huth and I met with the Economic Development Administration representative, and there's $60 million in the Midwest for 6 states for economic development assistance. we're in a good position because we had a lot of economic development damage to businesses on the west side of Middleton. So, but they will not buy land with Economic Development Administration funds. They will not pay for engineering costs for preliminary engineering. They'll cover up to half of final engineering costs, and they will go 50-50 on project construction costs. When Gary and I approached them with a small project for Graber Pond, they said, "You're thinking too small. We want big projects." And I think they were throwing the gauntlet down and saying, "Hey, you know, Middleton, come back with us, to us with some big projects." And I think we can do that. We have the ability to use tax increment financing for stormwater management. It's all over our plans that we can do that. We do have a very limited amount of stormwater utility funds, estimated to be $2.8 million over 5 years, and that can only go so far. So anyway, I just want to leave those thoughts with you too, because there's a lot of this discussion about the upstream properties, but a lot of that will take a very long time. And we've come a long way with the Creek Corridor, and I don't know that we should wait for upstream projects to do the Creek Corridor. I think that's something we need to wrestle with.
Other questions?
Well, a lot of hard work, good job. So, but you know, we got to prioritize what's important for the city. So, and what's important in the long run. That's very, very, even though, yeah, we got the process started to control managing the water, and this is the conveyance. We need to manage the water and the conveyance as well, so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I move we accept the plan.
Second.
Can we have it put on the website?
Sure, if it's not already.
Or the presentation tonight on the website?
So Susan, are you sending it to, or would it automatically go to water sources, public works and all of those things? Or do you have to make a motion?
We need to make a motion. We're just recommending acceptance and
Oh.
recommending to council
Okay.
what we're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
does it go,
do
does
you
it
want
go
this-
to other committees too?
If you want to, I mean, they were all invited here, so there should be
Yeah.
representatives that would be able to go back and discuss that. I would be completely fine with that. And if that means that it doesn't move towards council approval until April, then I don't see an issue with that.
We want to be sure it gets to council soon.
Did you want to specify at the A, B, or C whether you have a preference? Whether we have a preference on one of those? Because they're offering a plan, but they're saying there's 3 options in this plan. So if we just say we accept the plan,
I think they
the
have,
recommendation.
Recommendation is C.
they have a recommend, of their 3 options, they would say this one's recommended.
But yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that's what I would
concur with
recommend.
I just would say, John, that a lot of it involves water sources management. Before we really go too far, it should go to the Water Sources Management Committee and get their input. So I don't think city council should be, well, anyway, that's my opinion.
Anyways, I think it's good. I support the motion because I think that, as you said, we need to control the water uphill, but we can't wait for somebody else, which we're not in control of, to do that stuff. And if it does happen, then we'll have a beautiful plan. If it doesn't happen, we've taken some control to at least do something.
Right.
And my feeling of the plan is that it's a well-thought-out plan.
And we need to control the water to prevent damage to surrounding properties.
That's right.
I think an important example is the Cromery
Yeah.
Hill. 10 or 15 years ago, we did what was called the Hemble Hill. Those, because, especially for the Hemble one, it was getting very close to a house. So we've got, needs to be done to stabilize the banks.
Well, and what we're voting on is recommending it to the council. And they can decide they want input from other committees
Yes,
or
they
whatever.
can. And quite a few members of Water Resources were here. There's two of us, or no, one of us on Dan's on Water Resources, I'm on Stormwater Utilities. So we've got representatives.
I think well, one of the things that struck me too is that, the question came up, do we allow more bikes or we try to control it? I said that floodgate's already been open. Those people are already using this path all the time, all of these users, and any attempt to constrain that is basically saying to half the people paying taxes for this thing, sorry, you just
Right.
lost out on us. I mean, I think that's a story that should have been talked about 10 years ago.
And it's important to keep the wider trails as proposed for safety reasons, for ADA compliance. We don't want to limit people access because it's a difficult trail to walk on. We want to
Just right
maximize
here, it
use.
says, if you build it, they will come.
Yes.
And I've loved this city because, in fact, it has so many parks and all these natural resources. And so, in a sense, to me, it's even a driver of economic development, saying people would love to come here, put their companies, build and live, because I love it. I live near Tiedemann. I love it.
No question that the people will come. Can we get the river otters?
That's what I want.
Yeah, we have river otters. We have.
We already have.
Years ago, I think.
That's good.
Anyways.
It really is an amazing wildlife area in an urban area. I mean, the amount of time that I've spent down there, amazing birding, a lot of the underbank habitat that we created previously before the flood really fostered a lot of mink that would actually hunt and live in there. So just animals that you wouldn't expect to see in an urban area, river otters, things like that. So.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any more discussion about the motion? So, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay.
Unanimously approved. I think we're done. Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
Second,
All in
agreed.
favor,
Let's
say
go.
aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we're adjourned.
Traveling a lot.